Hello guys, welcome back to our anime moment. Guys, please like the video and subscribe to my channel. Today is explanation of Renegade Immortal episode number 213 based on novel. So let's start. Wang Lin looked at the entrance of the second valley, and from where he was standing it looked empty. He took a few steps forward and carefully looked around. Then his right hand formed a seal and a restriction flew out. This restriction split into 14 parts in the air and shot into the valley. Wang Lin's eyes shined as he watched the restrictions enter and silently disappear as if they were eaten. There wasn't any ripple at all. Wang Lin's eyes narrowed. After hesitating for a bit, his eyes were filled with resolve. His right hand began forming restrictions once more. However, this time he spent more time and formed dozens of restrictions. When they shot out, each of them split into 14. Those restrictions formed the shape of plum blossoms and flew toward the entrance. Wang Lin immediately followed them, and at the moment the restrictions entered the valley, his third eye opened. With the flash of red light, Wang Lin was able to see an invisible light screen at the entrance. The moment the plum blossoms touched the light screen, the devil's shadow appeared and immediately swallowed them. With the help of the third eye, Wang Lin could clearly see the light screen and the devil shadow, which was formed by almost transparent specks of light. Wang Lin's eyes lit up and he immediately backed up. With a thought, the plum blossoms also retreated with him. The devil shadow seemed to hesitate before chasing after the restrictions. At this moment, the light screen at the entrance became thin and the devil shadow extended. Wang Lin felt a sting from between his eyebrows. This was the sign that the third eye had reached its limit. He charged forward without any hesitation. He moved very fast and passed by the devil shadow in an instant, arriving directly before the thinning light screen. At the moment he touched the light screen, Wang Lin raised his finger and moved Ling Qianho's sword energy to his finger. He didn't release it but kept it inside his finger and pressed down on the light screen. The light screen trembled and then spread out, forming a gap. Wang Lin directly charged in without any hesitation. All of this happened in a short period of time. The invisible devil shadow jerked back and let out a silent roar. Then all of the specks of light gathered on its body and charged toward Wang Lin. Wang Lin's scalp felt numb as a cold wind that seemed to come from the depths of hell blew towards him. His third eye couldn't be maintained for long and had already automatically closed. Now that he entered the valley, the scene was completely different from what he saw from the outside. The earth of the valley was brown and countless skeletons covered the earth. They were everywhere, at least tens of thousands. There were some strange bugs drilling inside some of the skeletons. It was as if they were gnawing on the bones, giving off waves of crunching sounds as they did so. There were 8 short swords stabbed into the ground at the center of the valley. The looks and auras of these short swords were exactly the same as the one before. It was clear that they belonged to the same set. At the center of the 8 short swords there was a huge skull of a beast. It had 4 ferocious bone spurs pointing out and gave off a grim aura. Wang Lin didn't hesitate to charge into the valley and reach for the beast's skull. At this moment, the 8 short swords immediately released sword energy and shot toward Wang Lin. Before Wang Lin were the rays of sword energy and behind him was the devil shadow. At this moment of crisis, Wang Lin didn't panic and his eyes were calm. As the sword energy closed in, his finger pointed forward. Stop spell. This spell didn't only stop people. Those short swords weren't ordinary objects, but the stop spell wasn't ordinary either. Although Wang Lin's he can't stop them for long due to his cultivation level, he could still stop them for a moment. The moment he stopped the short swords, Wang Lin charged directly at the beast bone. The invisible devil shadow immediately chased after Wang Lin. Although he couldn't see the devil shadow, he felt a cold aura surrounding him. He was waiting for this moment. Because he couldn't keep the third eye up and his divine sense couldn't find it, if he wanted to deal with it, the moment it tired to devour him was the perfect moment. Wang Lin didn't turn around, but the shadow of a whip flashed between his eyebrows. The karma whip appeared before him and lashed out, causing a muffled groan to come from the void. At the same time, Wang Lin immediately felt the cold aura around him scatter. He didn't stop and everything moved as smooth as flowing water. His hand formed a seal and placed it on the beast bone before he picked it up and threw it into his bag. All of this was done in an instant. At this moment, the 8 short swords regained their freedom and whistled after Wang Lin. The valley wasn't large and he couldn't fly too high. In such a narrow place, Wang Lin was in somewhat of a sorry state when dodging the short swords. The invisible devil shadow seemed to have intelligence and had concealed its cold aura. It often only revealed itself the moment it was about to devour Wang Lin, and Wang Lin was nearly swallowed. In addition, it had blocked the exit, preventing Wang Lin from leaving. Wang Lin's eyes became cold. The short swords behind him scattered and came at him from 8 different directions. The sword energy coming from them all contained celestial spiritual energy. They were intertwined together to form a sword formation filled with killing intent. If this was it, it wouldn't be such a problem. After spending some time, Wang Lin would be able to leave. However, at the moment he picked up the beast bone, green mist started coming out from the countless skeletons that covered the ground. The green mist formed various shadows that charged toward Wang Lin. In addition to the mist, those bugs that were gaining on the bone seemed to be stimulated by something and rushed toward Wang Lin. Wang Lin's scalp went numb. Right now it seemed like there was no escape, as the entire valley was sealed. Wang Lin's eyes lit up and became fierce. Nothing here was naturally formed, it was all brought in from the outside. That means the mountain has no foundation. Wang Lin moved to the side and avoided the short swords, green mist, and bugs as he closed in on the cliff of the mountain. He let out a roar, and his right hand contained all the celestial spiritual energy and thunder in his body as he smashed his hand down. An earth-shattering explosion suddenly echoed across the valley. Large pieces of the mountain fell and kicked out endless amounts of dust while celestial spiritual energy spread out in all directions. Li Yuan, who was still 5 kilometers away, was completely stunned. He didn't know what was going on inside, but he could clearly feel the ground shake and saw countless pieces of the mountain falling off. The celestial guard next to Li Yuan was connected to Wang Lin. He stepped to the side and punched the mountain without any hesitation. There was another loud rumble. Li Yuan sucked in a breath of cold air. He vaguely guessed Wang Lin's idea and his heart started beating like crazy. He revealed a wry smile and thought that fellow cultivator Shu's ideas were sometimes too shocking. If it was with only Wang Lin's strength, he could shake the mountain but not break it. However, the celestial guard was different. Its body was extremely strong, and after that punch, the mountain's trembling became more intense. In the valley, Wang Lin's eyes were bloodshot as he grabbed the mountain and pulled it up. At the same time on the other side, the celestial guard was under more pressure. It buried its hands into the mountain and lifted the mountain up 10 feet. The loud rumble echoed across the valley and even the entire storage space began to tremble. The celestial guard lifted the mountain and went under it. Its body released a golden glow and it completely carried the mountain on its back. The violent vibrations affected the valley, causing the 8 short swords to pause. The green mist completely ignored Wang Lin and charged out under the mountain that was lifted up. Even the insects did the same. Popping sounds came from the celestial guard's body. It seemed to have gone crazy as it let out a growl and pushed the mountain up several dozen feet more. No matter how many spatial cracks appeared, they were crushed by the impact of the mountain. After lifting it up to a certain height, the celestial guard threw the mountain down. The earth shook, the storage space looked like it was about to collapse, and even more cracks appeared. The mountain fell from the sky and landed on the ground where all the cracks were, completely smashing them. Wang Lin used this opportunity to rush out from the valley. Even the invisible devil shadow disappeared without a trace, and no one knew where it had gone. Wang Lin grasped for air after rushing out of the valley and looked ahead. He could see that the third valley was also affected. At this moment, countless flashes of restriction light came from the third valley. It was apparent that many restrictions had collapsed due to the mountain. I fear the Celestial that owned the storage space would have never thought that someone would shake the mountain to break the restrictions here. Wang Lin adjusted his body for a bit before he rushed toward the third valley. His goal was the ancient god leather armor. Since the first 2 valleys didn't have it, then it was very likely in the third valley. Li Yuan sucked in a breath of cold air and the shock in his eyes gradually calmed down. He chased after Wang Lin with a wry smile. As for the Celestial Guard, it had used too much energy. It turned into a phantom and fused with Wang Lin's shadow to recover. Wang Lin and Li Yuan charged toward the third valley one after the other. They got closer and closer, and shortly after, they arrived before the third valley. This place was seriously damaged. The originally narrow entrance were pulled open. Countless restriction lights flashed non-stop. At a glance, Wang Lin was able to see a temple inside the valley. This temple wasn't large, but it was seriously damaged. The door was even gone. There were 2 skeletons inside, and one of them was wearing the ancient god leather armor. As for the other skeleton, it had nothing, but there was a flash of gold coming from its right hand that had pierced through the skull of the skeleton wearing the ancient god leather armor. The skull was filled with cracks. It was apparent it had been crushed by that grab. Although he didn't see the battle, he could imagine the fierce fight the 2 skeletons had just from looking at them. Wang Lin's right hand reached out and the ancient god leather armor flew off the skeleton and into his hand. The moment he touched the leather armor, he immediately felt a bloody and sorrowful feeling. Upon closer inspection, the leather armor was very rough and gave off an ancient aura. Even now there was the residue of a powerful aura in it, as if it was telling everyone how powerful the owner was. Li Yuan walked forward and arrived next to the other skeleton. He stared at the golden fingers of the other skeleton. Then he took a deep breath, squatted down, and broke off the fingers one by one. When he raised his head, he glanced into the temple without a door and his pupils immediately shrank. He shouted, "Brother Shu, look!" Wang Lin raised his head, took a few steps forward, and looked into temple. Even with his mental fortitude, he couldn't help but suck in a breath of cold air. He scanned the temple to determine if it was safe before he entered. Li Yuan was beside Wang Lin and he also stepped into the temple. The temple was divided into 2 floors. The first floor had no place for worship and was completely empty. There were several murals hanging on the walls. There were a total of 9 murals. Looking at them one by one, Li Yuan's eyes were filled with a strange light. He muttered, "This? What kind of spell is this? How can there be such a large person? It is possible these stories in the pictures were made up. Those paintings clearly painted a huge giant with 8 stars on its forehead. He was surrounded by countless celestials armed with various treasures that attacked him like crazy. The celestials' bodies were really insignificant compared to the giant. The giant's eyes were filled with cold indifference, but the paint was so attentive that even the exhaustion within that cold gaze could be clearly felt. All 9 murals were like this. 8-star. Ancient God, Wang Lin silently pondered as he looked up at the second floor. He let out a sigh and walked up, leaving Li Yuan muttering to himself on the first floor. After all, not many people knew of the ancient gods. The second floor was rather simple. There was only a table with yellow parchment paper spread out and a few brushes next to it. It was easy to imagine that the master of this place liked painting. Not far away from the table was a censer, but there was only dust remaining inside it. Wang Lin arrived next to the table and saw a paper was being held down by a paperweight. This paperweight gave off waves of celestial spiritual energy, so it was obvious it wasn't ordinary. However, Wang Lin didn't look at the paperweight but at the paper. The 16th year of the 27th era of the Celestial Realm. The first war between the Ancient Order and the Celestial Realm ended in victory. My magic treasure was broken and needs to be refined here. However, due to my exploits, I was rewarded a piece of its skin and made a suit of leather armor from it. The 19th year of the 27th era of the Celestial Realm. A shocking change occurred. The Celestial Emperor went crazy and died pointing at the sky. I personally saw everything, that scene that shouldn't have existed when the Celestial Emperor died. Ever since I became a Celestial, I never feared even when battling against the ancient god. However, at that moment, I became timid and scared. I saw what should have never been seen. As most of the Celestials battled, I escaped and there was a pair of eyes following me. I had to paint what I saw. The handwriting became very sloppy at the end. It was easy to see how anxious the person writing this was. I drew it. But what is this? What did I paint? The note ended here. Wang Lin's eyes became serious. After pondering for a moment, he sat down before the table and picked up the brush. He wanted to feel exactly what happened when the Celestial drew this. Wang Lin held the brush and slowly closed his eyes. After a long time, he suddenly opened his eyes and his hand began writing according to the text. He gradually found a trace of what the Celestial was feeling. His mind gradually became anxious as he wrote. This was a feeling of hesitation and confusion mixed together. This aura remained in this room even to this day. Finally, Wang Lin's right hand suddenly stopped in the air. He looked up outside through the window on the second floor. This Celestial had just finished the painting, but he became even more confused. After leaving these words, there was a change. Someone must have arrived. Wang Lin put down the brush and looked outside. He more or less figured out some clues. After looking at the paper, he waved his right hand and the paper burst into flames. After burning it clean, Wang Lin put away the paperweight. When he walked down from the second floor, he saw Li Yuan taking down the paintings from the first floor and putting them inside his bag. Wang Lin hesitated a bit before saying, "Brother Li, you must be careful about where you store the paintings. You mustn't let outsiders see them, otherwise, it will cause a great catastrophe." Li Yuan seemed to realize something and nodded. Li Yuan asked, "There should be more magical treasures or jades inside this storage space. Is Brother Shu not going to look a bit longer?" Wang Lin shook his head. "Brother Li can look for them." After seeing the contents of the paper, his heart was filled with the mysteries of why the celestial realm had collapsed. In particular, after seeing the second valley, Wang Lin felt that even if there were treasures remaining, there would be very few. This was because the most important treasure, the beast bone, was already taken by him. This beast bone was obviously the broken treasure mentioned in the note that was being refined. Okay, while I place down the collapse restrictions, I can also look around. I also need to find an exit out of here, and if there isn't one, it will take some time to connect one. Li Yuan clasped his hands at Wang Lin and looked up at the second floor. He didn't go up but walked out the temple. Wang Lin sat down outside the temple. He took out the 9 beast bones and began to slowly study them. Time flew by and 1 month passed in the blink of an eye. Li Yuan didn't have much harvest in this month, so after a while, he stopped looking. However, what was worth mentioning was the 8 short swords that attacked Wang Lin. Li Yuan used some unknown method and managed to control them. Wang Lin was very shocked about this, but when he considered Li Yuan's restrictions, he seemed to understand. In this 1 month of time, Li Yuan placed restrictions at all the collapse points he calculated inside the storage space. Li Yuan seemed to show even more interest in plotting against the blood ancestor than Wang Lin. Every time he thought about how his restrictions could possibly help kill a god, Li Yuan would become short of breath. Although he was very alert, he had one glaring weakness, and that was his blind self-confidence in his family's restrictions. In addition, he also considered what would happen if the blood ancestor didn't die, so he made his decision. He would only secretly help in this matter but not participate. After the arrangement was finished, he decided he would separate from Wang Lin. After all, this matter was too big, even if he was indebted to Wang Lin. In truth, to help in secret was also his limit. It was already very difficult for him to even help at this point. On this day, Li Yuan returned to the temple with a serious expression. He looked at Wang Lin with a complex gaze and let out a heavy sigh. Then he waved his right hand and a crystal restriction ball flew out and floated before Wang Lin. "Brother Shu, I have placed 1,465 collapse points using the annihilation restriction. All you need to do is activate this restriction ball with your celestial spiritual energy and this storage space will completely collapse." Wang Lin held the restriction ball and scanned it with his divine sense. After making sure there were no problems, he clasped his hands and said, "Many thanks." Li Yuan's expression darkened and he said with hesitation, "Brother Shu, in fact, I have a method if you don't wish to be found by the blood ancestor." All you have to do is hide inside a cave and not leave, until that blood ancestor has forgotten his hate. Wang Lin calmly smiled and said, I'll remember Brother Li's kindness. If there is no way to fight against the blood ancestor, then I might really have to trouble Brother Li. Li Yuan silently pondered, and after a long time he took out a jade. He handed the jade to Wang Lin and said, Brother Shu, this is a record of my Li family's annihilation restriction. Although I can't give you a piece of the restriction heart without being at the ancestral temple, studying it should help you. There are even several methods for hiding your aura. Wang Lin silently accepted it and nodded. Li Yuan let out a sigh as both his hands formed a seal and a transfer array appeared before him. This array was not stable, it seemed as if it could collapse at any moment. Brother Shu, this transfer array can only be opened 3 times. You have to be careful. Li Yuan looked at Wang Lin again as he stepped into the transfer array. He didn't look back but softly said, if I didn't have any responsibilities tying me down, I would definitely stay and witness how my Li family's restriction plotted against a Nirvana cleanser cultivator. Brother Shu, take care. Li Yuan's sigh echoed. His figure disappeared within the flashing transfer array. Wang Lin raised his head and his eyes became cold. He muttered to himself, blood ancestor. Yao Shishue. Even though both of you have blood soul pills, I'm going to gamble this one time to see if you guys can completely revive under the power that can destroy everything from the collapsing space. Wang Lin had a bag of holding on him. This bag belonged to Yao Shishue, but he couldn't open it. He could only place restrictions on it to make the aura not spread out too far. In addition to this bag of holding, Wang Lin originally had a real blood soul pill, but it was used in his battle against the scattered devil. He knew that there was at least one other blood soul pill, but he couldn't open the bag. It's impossible for anyone to have many of these heaven-defying pills, even the blood ancestor. After many years of consumption, I fear that having even 1 or 2 is the limit for the blood ancestor. While he sneered, Wang Lin took out the restriction ball holding Yao Shishue. He no longer had any interest in asking questions, so he threw the restriction ball. It immediately flew out and was buried deep inside the distant mountain. After doing all of this, Wang Lin took a step and entered the transfer array. There was a flash of light and Wang Lin disappeared. Blood ancestor. Since you aren't willing to let me go, then I will do as Li Yuan said, try to kill a god. When he walked out of the transfer array, what appeared before him after the light faded was a foreign land. The sky was still gloomy and was filled with thunder. At a glance, he wasn't able to see the edge of the land. Although it was unfamiliar, it still had a familiar aura. This place was still the Thunder Celestial Realm. Li Yuan is very talented. Wang Lin looked into the distance. He rarely admires people, but he admired Li Yuan's ability to use various restrictions. It required a lot of knowledge about restrictions to be able to build a transfer array to leave the storage space of a celestial. Wang Lin knew that it would be very difficult for him to do this. After withdrawing his gaze, Wang Lin raised his hand and waved at the transfer array behind him. The transfer array shrank into a fist-sized crystal and was put inside his bag. He looked around before turning into a ray of light and flying into the distance. After flying for several days, Wang Lin secretly noted the area. He carefully landed on a mountain, and after determining there were no abnormalities nearby, he went underground. After diving deep into the mountain, he hid the bag he couldn't open that he got from Yao Shishu. After setting a few more restrictions, Wang Lin carefully left. It would be too conspicuous for him to keep holding onto the bag, and it wouldn't help his plan. After hiding the bag, Wang Lin quickly moved underground until he was very far away and resurfaced on a plain. He looked back at the mountain in the distance before turning into a ray of light and flying off into the distance. He moved very fast and didn't stop anywhere on this fragment. Soon, he arrived at the chains on the edge of the fragment and quickly crossed it. After flying cautiously on the chain over the void, Wang Lin saw another fragment. He took a deep breath and went directly underground after reaching the new fragment. After finding a location, he began placing down restrictions. During this 1 month of flight, Wang Lin researched the restrictions on how to hide his aura that Li Yuan gave him. Wang Lin's research progressed extremely fast due to the threat of the blood ancestor closing in. He couldn't completely conceal himself from the blood ancestor, he could only make himself harder to detect. If it was under ordinary circumstances, he would eventually be found, but combined with Wang Lin's current plan, it might be possible for him to really stay hidden. Strands of restrictions appeared around him, forming a ball of restrictions, and he sat down inside. Just as the restriction ball was about to close, the Celestial Guard stepped out. Looking at the Celestial Guard, Wang Lin revealed a grim smile. He threw the transfer array crystal at the Celestial Guard and slowly closed his eyes. A portion of his divine sense split from his body and directly entered the Celestial Guard. This was one of the Celestial Guard spells. It allowed the divine sense of the person who refined it to enter and control it. After the portion of Origin Soul flew out, Wang Lin's eyes began to close. Right before his eyes closed, one last restriction flew out from his hand and completed the restriction ball. The ball rapidly shrank until it disappeared in a flash of light. The Celestial Guard opened its eyes and its eyes became cold. It grabbed the transfer array crystal and swallowed it before quickly charging out from underground. After moving his body and getting over the discomfort of a few body, Wang Lin checked underground with his divine sense. He was unable to detect where his body was. If I didn't have the Celestial Guard, I wouldn't be able to deceive the blood ancestor. However, I'm taking the initiative, and once he becomes aware of the origin soul inside this body, he won't be able to avoid this attraction. Wang Lin lowered his head and looked at his body. He charged into the distance like a meteor with his divine sense spread out. He was like a bright light in the dark. If someone was looking for him, they would immediately be able to lock onto him. Wang Lin flew unbridled along the way. He had been suppressing his feelings since he came to the All-Heaven star system. After all, he had escaped here, and those old monsters from the Alliance star system could have chased him over at any time. The reality of it all made him cautious. However, since the blood ancestor had already arrived and how strong this body was, Wang Lin decided to let go of his caution. Although the Celestial Guard couldn't compare to his original body, it was far stronger than any cultivator and even some body-refining cultivators. As a result, Wang Lin naturally had an arrogant aura while he flew. Blood Ancestor. Now I'm waiting for your arrival. Wang Lin's eyes were extremely cold. He was going to kill. His killing intent had reached the level of illusory yin because of his current body. Even if he encountered other cultivators, they would hesitate and avoid him. Wang Lin didn't even look for treasures as he quickly flew from fragment to fragment. Every time he arrived on a fragment, his divine sense would spread out like crazy. Time slowly passed. In the blink of an eye, 5 months passed. Wang Lin charged through everything. Naturally, because he had important things to do, he didn't look for trouble. However, if those without eyes came looking for trouble, he would not hold back. The powerful body and the spell from Wang Lin's divine sense caused his strength to reach its peak. In these 5 months, he had gained a little prestige among the cultivators here. In particular, the power of the body that could match magical treasures caused many ascendant cultivators to avoid him on sight. Even illusory yin cultivators would frown and avoid him as well. However, Wang Lin wasn't moving blindly. He moved around the fragments near the one where his body was. This limited his movement and had 2 advantages. The first was that he wasn't moving around randomly and therefore wouldn't end up accidentally missing the blood ancestor. Second, he was indirectly protecting his body. After all, if he went too far and his body was found by the blood ancestor, then he would be on the defensive side. He was searching for the blood ancestor and at the same time the blood ancestor was searching for him. The two became closer and closer. The blood ancestor was wearing a red robe as he moved through the void. One step from him was like teleportation, and he moved across the chains extremely fast. His expression was calm, as if he wasn't angry at all. However, his eyes became redder every day. With his cultivation, even if the heavens collapsed, his mood wouldn't change, but his only daughter, Yao Shishue, was his only weakness. He was willing to fight against the heavens and kill everything in his path for his daughter. Even if he had to choose between his daughter and reaching the 3rd step, he might struggle and hesitate, but in the end he would choose his daughter. This was where he was completely different from the All-Seer and Ling Qianhu. If it was the All-Seer, he would give up everything and choose the third step. For his own daughter, he was even willing to give up his own dignity, give up on the oath his dying father made him take, to never take half a step into the All-Heaven star system. Father, when you made me make the oath, why did you leave behind an All-Heaven stone? This question had existed in the Blood Ancestor's heart for a very long time. The Blood Ancestor calmly took a step and landed on the fragment. His divine sense spread out like a storm and covered the entire continent. However, at this moment, his originally calm face became cold. He slowly raised his head and looked into the distance. His eyes revealed killing intent strong enough to almost become corporeal. Wang Lin. His killing intent was so powerful that a mountain in front of him was affected by this killing intent and immediately collapsed. As the rocks and dust flew everywhere, the Blood Ancestor took a step and disappeared without a trace. At the moment before the Blood Ancestor stepped foot on the fragment, Wang Lin moved like a meteor on the chain on the other side of the fragment. Just as he was about to arrive and spread out his divine sense, the sky suddenly darkened and dark clouds began gathering in the sky. Even the fragment began trembling. All of the cultivators on this fragment immediately felt this tremble in their souls, no matter what cultivation level they were at. Even illusory yin and corporeal yang cultivators were no different. The difference in cultivation levels made it impossible for them to resist. It was as if the heavens' might was descending. Wang Lin immediately moved and his eyes shined brightly as he stared into the distance. He revealed a cold smile. "You've finally arrived." There was a thunderous roar and the clouds split apart as if there was a giant pair of hands ripping them apart. Blood-red light appeared and covered the land. The powerful divine sense was like a storm that swept across the entire fragment. This divine sense was too powerful. The second step spell contained within the fragment actually almost caused the fragment to collapse. The red light coming from the clouds before Wang Lin was even more bright. It was as if at this moment the fragment was surrounded by red light. It was as if it had been thrown into a blood pool. The red light condensed 1,000 feet before Wang Lin. In almost an instant, the figure condensed, revealing a red-haired and red-eyebrowed middle-aged man in red robes. This man was so handsome that even Qian Feng, Zhu Qiuzi's disciple and Liu Mai's senior, felt somewhat lacking compared to him. This man had a unique aura around him. When he appeared, he calmly looked at Wang Lin and didn't say a word. However, Wang Lin could clearly see a red fire that could burn the world hidden inside those calm eyes. The Blood Ancestor didn't waste any time with Wang Lin. He raised his right hand and pointed at Wang Lin. After he pointed, cracking sounds came from the sky as if it was being ripped open by that finger. That force charged straight for Wang Lin's forehead. Wang Lin stared at the Blood Ancestor. As the finger closed in, he slowly said, "If you kill me, even though Yao Shishua has the Blood Soul pill, she will surely die." This video will end here.